Hello and welcome to another edition of the China in Africa podcast. I'm Eric Olander, and as always, I'm joined by Cobus van Staden of Wits University in Johannesburg, South Africa. A very good afternoon to you, Cobus.
Good afternoon.
Cobus, usually when we talk on this show, we discuss subjects of geopolitics, economics, immigration, racism, all these kind of very heavy, kind of what we'll call nonfiction topics. And so it's really kind of exciting for me today to kind of shift gears and look at the China-Africa art scene. And we've seen over the past few years some kind of blossoming development, both from African artists and to some extent from Chinese artists. And one area in particular is film. Now, once or twice a year, we get a filmmaker who comes along and does a short, and they do something kind of very improvisational oftentimes. Last year, or actually earlier this year, a director from New York University, Quester Hanna, he came out with a short film about African migrant life in Guangzhou. And so we're starting to see kind of the blossoming of this really new aspect of the China-Africa relationship in the arts. And Cobus, it just makes me so excited that we're going in this direction.
Yeah, it's wonderful. As a media person, I'm particularly excited about that. And also, as you know, it just gives us such an interesting view of China-Africa relations, because so frequently what people think about each other, what Chinese people think about Africans, what Africans think about Chinese people are things that are done through opinion surveys and then put on graphs, you know, in standard research. And through filmmaking, it becomes so much more alive.
Yeah, and I think what you bring up a really interesting point here. It's that, you know, when we talk about the news and you talk about the discussions, it's so impersonal. It's dehumanized in many ways. And so when we see films like the one we're going to talk about today come out, it puts it into such a personal human way. And I think that's what's so exciting. So we're going to introduce everybody to Carl Houston Mc Millan. He is a young filmmaker out of Lesotho in southern Africa, that tiny little speck of a country surrounded by South Africa. He has come up with just one of the most, and I'm kind of at a loss for words right now, because it truly is a stunning piece of filmmaking. And it's called Lesotho, which is Lesotho. It's about a 20-minute short. It's out a little bit on the internet. We're going to help kind of give it some legs as well. Carl wrote, direct, produced. Carl, what did you did it all, right?
Hi, yes, everything except shoot it. My friend Christian Denslow, he shot it.
Fantastic. Well, welcome to the show. It is an excellent piece of filmmaking. And again, what I thought was so powerful for me was the very personal nature of the story. So let me just quickly set up kind of the narrative and then let you get into it. You basically you have two parallel stories going at the same time. One is of an African doctor living in, or I'm assuming a Lesotho doctor living in China. And then you also talk about a young Chinese man who lives in Lesotho. And what you're kind of dissecting is the interpersonal relationships across the cultures and with the various characters in it. Tell us a little bit about what inspired you to kind of make this film and kind of develop these characters.
I say I'm from Lesotho, but originally I'm South African or of Irish descent, but I've grown up my whole life in Lesotho. And I often spend a lot of time in the mountains. I mean, even now I'm phoning you from Harambavanta, which is in the center of Lesotho. It's a small village. And in these small sort of towns in Lesotho is very small. And they've got small towns with shops, and there's not often many shops. And there's a lot of Chinese immigrants in these shops, and it sort of caught my curiosity. I've always been a foreigner. I've lived here, but every day people ask me where I'm from and what I'm doing here, and that's what sparked the interest. Is going into these villages, and you find one little shop, and it's a Chinese immigrant, and it sort of sparks my curiosity. And why did that person come to this little village in the middle of the mountains in this little country in this middle of South Africa that many South Africans don't even know much about?
I was very struck by how natural your actors were. The actor who you cast as the African doctor who works in China, he speaks very realistic Chinese. The actors just feel very natural in their environment. Like they don't feel like actors; they feel like people. So I was wondering how your casting worked in this project?
This is just a passion project. I had no budget, so I had to go on a search for people. So they're non-actors. There's a few actors in the film, but the majority are non-actors or first-time actors. And for casting in China, that was a bit difficult. I mean, basically it's from asking around and using WeChat networks and that. And I did find someone who was keen, and he had lived in China for 10 years. And he felt that the topic was important, and he wanted to give it a shot. And in Lesotho, that was my friend. I went to school with him. He has a few businesses in Lesotho, and it was his first time acting as well.
So these actors kind of undertook this challenge to kind of, represent the cultural tensions that exist between, say, Chinese and Lesotho culture and, basically Chinese and African cultures. What do you think they brought to the story that you didn't include in your script? Well,
maybe I can just talk about how I found the story, the China half in particular. I had gone to China to visit some friends who were studying there on scholarships from Chinese governments, and I met a guy who was from Sierra Leone, and he was studying medicine, and I stayed with him, and we became friends. And I was really impressed at his ability to speak Mandarin, and he was doing medicine in Mandarin. And he's saying that he was going to find it very difficult in the workplace if he wanted to work in China, even though he had the same qualification as his classmates. Just being black was going to be more difficult in the workplace in China. And I thought that was really interesting. And I shared this story with a lot of people, a lot of African students in China, and they thought it was very important, and they had felt it. It's not in your face, racism, but it exists, and they all wanted something to be said about it, but didn't know how. So when I approached Said, who's actually from Tanzania, he felt it was very important, and he wanted to give it a shot and try act in it.
And how did you deal with the language issue? Like a lot of the lines in the film are either in Sesotho or in Chinese, and people switch very effectively between the different languages, kind of as they do frequently in Africa. So kind of did you write in English and have your actors translate, or how did that work?
I co-directed with a Chinese director, and he helped on that side with the language. I only know basic Mandarin just survival. Sesotho, I also only know basic survival Sesotho. So I also worked with my Chinese teacher here, who is a Mosotho himself, who teaches me Mandarin, and he helped with the translation into Sesotho from English. So I wrote in English, and I got people to translate.
So for those of our listeners who haven't seen it, in the movie, the short film is available on our website. We're posting it on the Huffington Post and our story there, and we're posting it anywhere this podcast you'll see other than in iTunes. We'll accompany a link to it so you can watch it. And it's just, again, it's stunning filmmaking, particularly from just a passion perspective, a shoestring budget, bootstrapping the whole thing. It's even more impressive. You talked about the tensions, and that's clearly what the focus of the film is between the Chinese and African cultures and Lesotho culture in this case. And you have a narrative arc. So you begin your film by kind of highlighting how these two cultures are abrasive to one another, how they don't really click. And then through kind of interaction, whether it's the doctor caring for the old woman or whether it's the Chinese shop owner who takes a liking to the son and then, helps pay for schools. By the end of the film, there's some hope that, maybe these two cultures are getting along and do have potential. And I'm wondering how that mirrors your own experiences in Lesotho. Do you see that similar narrative arc that over time, as people get to know each other, as languages are spoken, as there are mutual bonds, that they're becoming closer? Or have we not yet seen the end of the story in real life in places like Lesotho?
I feel language is the biggest barrier, especially when you come and open up a business in a village. People want have a lot of questions: who you are, what's your story, where you're from, and they don't get those answers. And when you don't get those answers and you can't communicate, tension arises, and people make up their own stories. And there's a lot of friction and tension. When you go into these shops, you hear an exchange of broken Sesotho, and it's really rude and a lot of swear words on both sides thrown back and forth. And there's just unanswered questions of these immigrants and who they are and where they're from. And I feel that media can help. If we see on Lesotho TV, we see stories, fictional stories, about Chinese immigrants in Lesotho and what they're doing. And on the other side, in China, if we see TV shows, TV dramas about Chinese immigrants doing projects in Africa, and even use comedy and use humor, I feel that would help, because it's very difficult to see Chinese TV shows here, and of course in China to see other outside sort of content, video content, especially online.
Cobus, Carl talks
I think
about
media can help.
Yeah, Carl talks about a very interesting point here about media kind of playing a role. And Cobus, I'd like to get, as a media scholar, your take on this, because for those of us who either live in the West or kind of live with Western social media and Western media, as I do, the discussion about immigrants today, particularly in Europe and the United States, is entirely negative. It's dominated by, xenophobia and anti-immigrant sentiment in Europe, and certainly in places like Germany, and also in the United States, where Donald Trump has kind of based a lot of his campaign on an anti-immigrant message. And so seeing Carl's film for me was, refreshing, because it did kind of reflect a different side of the story. And I'd be interested your take on kind of where we are now in the media landscape in terms of, immigrants and the role that they play in media, and then placing Carl's film in that context.
It's a complicated question. Immigrants in South Africa frequently get very negative press. There's a lot of insinuations about immigrants being linked to crime. There's not very kind of effective integration of immigrants into South African culture frequently. So there's a tendency for people to be in enclaves, simply because South Africa is also a society of enclaves. I think we're coming from not a very, very exalted place in media depictions of immigrants.
But to be fair, Cobus, that is really the same as that's what Donald Trump is saying. That's what the far right in Europe is saying. I mean, and that's the problem in Europe, is the ghettoization of immigrants. And I guess, Carl, the story that you're telling here with Chinese in Lesotho and Lesothoans in China, in many ways seems to be a universal story. Cobus kind of talked about the ghettoization, the kind of, in many ways the criminalization of immigrants in media, and yet you're bringing this very human story to life. And I'm wondering if you think of the story that you have portrayed and brought to life in film is a universal story, or do you see something specific about the Chinese and African characters in the movie?
No, I'm still exploring. It was a bit of an experiment, this film, just to show like two sides of the same coin. I just feel like media or entertainment, if you use entertainment as to sort of answer these questions, because there's a lot of curiosity with Lesotho of China, and there's a lot of curiosity within China of Africa. And if you don't feed that curiosity, then there's a block and tensions arise. But if you feed it with entertainment, then I know there's a lot of soft power relations, but even the CCTV is shown on LTV, but it's just news and it's boring and no one really is interested. And there needs to be entertaining drama series, I feel. That would help.
One of the great things that you kind of added, a great detail that you added in the film, is the fact that everyone is watching kung fu movies, which is something that I have done a bunch of research on, and I have a paper coming out about this very soon. So it was just very gratifying for me to see you kind of name checking that, because I do think the kung fu film really has created this very interesting space in Africa for thinking about China. This kind of fantasy China, kind of that played a very kind of powerful role in different parts of African history, and I think it is actually an example of a kind of a media that opens up a space for discussion between China and Africa.
Yeah, I mean. Yeah, all kids, if they don't know anything about China, they'll know Kung Fu and they'll know how to imitate some moves they've seen on films. Yeah.
What were your biggest challenges producing this film, both in Lesotho and in China?
The whole process was a challenge. I was on my own and I just had an idea and I wanted to make it into something to be experienced. I'm quite tired of it now. It's been a whole year, the whole process. I mean, the shoot days were only 6 days, but a whole year of coming up with the story, visiting China, trying to find an isolated spot on the Great Wall, and traveling and getting lost in buses and public transport, and everything was quite a challenge. Finding the cast, Lesotho was a bit easier because it's home turf. Yeah, it is challenging filmmaking, especially when you're on your own.
Yeah,
but it's a rewarding process.
Yeah, I can see, and you deserve the credit. Cobus, I feel like, we try hard to be kind of, impartial and kind of neutral and fair, but I think we've a little too gushing in this case here, because it's a stunning piece of art, and I really hope that everybody has a chance to look at it. I guess, Cobus, for me, I'm hoping that, Carl, you're probably not going to devote his life now to China-Africa filmmaking. I suspect that this was a nice passion project and time to move on to other, exciting topics out there. But I'm hoping that we'll start to see reflections of, the China-Africa experience in photography and painting and poetry and filmmaking, and that really we're just at the beginning of a renaissance. In some ways, too, I've been thinking about this, Cobus, that all the different people that you and I have spoken to who are creating this art tend to be under 30 years old. And I think that's fascinating to me. I haven't seen older people kind of really getting into the creative artistic space of this relationship. And I wonder if that's just because that younger people are being able to look at the relationship in a totally open way or less binary way, framed by kind of colonialism and an education in the Cold War kind of style.
Yeah, I think so. I would also add that young people frequently are more. They have more flexibility, and they also have technological flexibility. Obviously, so they find, like Carl did, they find ways of making it happen on a small budget. I just have to also say that Carl, I thought the movie was really well shot. It looks beautiful, which is frequently the hardest. That and good sound is the hardest things to achieve on a small budget, and I thought both were really, really great. Can you talk a little bit about just how you shot it? Like, you can kind of just kind of like what kind of physical ways of shooting and lighting and so on you use to actually get that look.
My good friend Christian Denslow, he's a director of photography. He shot it. He shot it on just a very small camera. We bought some lights we were in Beijing. We actually shot in Beijing, and we bought some lights there. We even found some gels, and we found a bit of crew through meeting people, and but there was a lot of restrictions. Also shooting in the streets. The lady was concerned about authorities coming along, and also the interior location was hard to find the interior location. So, but it was very small, low key. We found a sound designer in Beijing, and it was very small, very small.
And what's next for you in the film? Are you going to kind of submit it to film festivals? Do you want people to see it? Are you putting it up on Chinese social networks? What's your plan for Lesotho?
Yeah, I would like to just get it out there and online and get people's responses. Also get it on Yoku. It's under review right now. I've uploaded it. I don't know what's taking so long. And just get it out there on blogs and see if there's any discussion. It was a bit of an experiment, and it's it's nice to just make it into something for people to experience.
Well, we're certainly going to do our part by sharing the film as far as we possibly can. Lesotho is the 21-minute film, fictional film, actually, beautifully shot, beautifully acted, just really all around, probably the most impressive piece of filmmaking that in almost 10 years of studying this field that we've seen. And Carl Houston Mc Millan is the filmmaker. He's the director, the writer, and he put it together. And just congratulations, Carl, and thank you so much for joining us on the show.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me.
And Cobus, we will post the film up again, and we'll be back again very soon with another edition of the China in Africa podcast. For Cobus Van Staden, I'm Eric Olander. Thank you so much for listening.
The discussion continues online. Head over to facebook.com/China Africa Project to share your thoughts on today's show, or follow China Africa News that's updated every 4 hours, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. The guys are also on Twitter, where you can find Cobus at Stadenesque or Eric at E. Olander. That's EOLANDER. Subscribe to the China Africa podcast on iTunes or download the mobile apps for iOS, Android, or Windows Phone. Just head over to your favorite store and search for China Africa.